I think a lot of beginner developers are secretly anxious right now. Not because coding is hard, but because AI suddenly made coding weird. Like you spent weeks learning something and then ChatGPT does it in like 5 seconds. And honestly, sometimes it makes you wonder, am I actually learning or am I becoming someone who knows how to ask AI questions? Hello, this is Julie from Ju's Creative Works. Today's question is, what does it mean to become a developer in the age of AI? And more importantly, what happens to beginner developers now? Welcome to the podcast. I'm Julie, and today we're talking about AI, coding, creativity, hiring, and learning, and whether coding is starting to lose the thing that made people fall in love with in the first place. And joining me today is Teo, an AI engineer currently working in Rocks. Welcome. Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Teok, and I am a founding engineer at Rocks. Rocks is a AI company where we build sales tools for Global 2000 companies.
Oh, that's interesting. I have a lot of questions as I'm a beginner developer. I'd like to call myself that. And I have a lot of worries these days. I want to start with something simple. So here's the question. Why did you start coding?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's because I wanted to solve problems, right? When I used computers, there was a lot of, sometimes things would be clunky. Like you'd have to do too many clicks to get to things or, go through a complicated process. And as a lazy person, I really wanted to get rid of all that barriers. And I just wanted things to, work like as fast as I can. And I was like, can I automate any of these things? Can I take any shortcuts? And that's when I realized, like, oh, hey, if I write the code myself and get the computer to do the work that I want to do exactly the way I want it. And so I think that was how I started uh, learning how to code was automating away my little problems here and there.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Um, Funny thing, but as I'm starting to learn coding, I'm not experiencing that fun.
Hmm.
And this actually reminds me of something that I read while I was preparing this episode. Um, there was this episode from a podcast called Beyond Coding, and one of the hosts mentioned that the junior developers may lose foundational experience if they keep using AI or, you know, they usually use their routine tasks to be automated. And I think this perfectly explains what people are worried about right now. Okay, so I'm in this club. We call ourselves Code Club, and we recently had a talk about the changes that we're experiencing in the age of AI. And one of my friends said that AI is taking the fun out of coding. And one other person also said that he's not feeling needed in a project. He's just feeling like, am I a web hoster or a web publisher? And he doesn't feel like he's a developer in there. And actually, I'm the youngest and most inexperienced developer there. And I even don't feel like I'm qualified to call myself a developer.
Hmm.
So for me, AI is just like a booster that makes possible for me to make fun stuff without learning all sorts of languages in advance. So this might sound a little bit dramatic, but do you think AI is making coding less fun?
I don't think it's making less fun, uh, in any sort of way. I think it's actually, uh, it might be making it more fun by automating boring parts away and letting the human focus on the parts that matter, that require human input and thought. and considerations.
Ooh. Well, beforehand, I've thought that the fun of coding was like straining for 5 hours to get this bug repaired or stuff like that. I thought
Mm.
that was yes, like the problem solving things, those were the fun of coding. And okay, that's interesting. Then can you explain why it's more fun?
Yeah, I honestly have a slightly different take in problem solving in that, like, sure, I guess there is the crux of, I guess, software development, which includes the debugging process, right? Going through hours of, trying to figure out what went wrong and, feeling that,
Mhm.
struggle. And at the end, once you figure it out, you're like, oh, this is amazing. Like it's finally works, and that relief. So sure, I guess you may be losing that at certain steps, but I guess two different things. One, I think the fun of building software,
Uh-huh.
as I said earlier, comes from actually solving like real problems. And because I can now focus on just the problem and not the aspect of getting the code out, uh, it means that I can iterate faster to a solution. Because there's a lot of boilerplate code that you have to write when you write software. And when I say boilerplate, I mean like the template code where you always
Mhm.
have to write things, whether it's like setting up an application or setting up a server, right? It's like it's not the interesting part, and everyone has to write that part. Before AI, you would manually set that up, set up all the ports, set up all the, security certificates, like all this, random stuff that matters, but is, not really relevant to solving your specific problem. Versus with AI, it's so good at doing these things, right? Like setting up the basic template, the server, like whatever it may be. So that part, I'd rather have the AI do it because like that's not the fun part.
Oh my god, that was very helpful. Alright. Then can I ask a question related to web development? This is how I build web these days. I have an idea. I design it with Figma. I love Figma. I use prompts in Cursor, and then I just look over the code and I learn the code. And then I change or debug stuff that are needed, and then I just publish it. So I basically think I'm not a developer and I'm more of a designer. So now I assume that you don't do this. And my guess is that you bought a huge book that has like a dinosaur on it that says like JavaScript really big. So, how do you use to build a web? And what are some changes that you're experiencing these days?
So how did I used to build it before AI versus now?
Yes, 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 yes.
Mm. Yeah, I think uh it used to be that, as I said, like spin up a new repository, I set up all the basic, website templates, like whether it's like using like, and then, you just start writing code. Like that was what I literally did. Like I would just like, start writing code. And if there's a problem that I encountered, I would just Google it. There'd be this website called Stack Overflow that would be so helpful because it had, all the questions that people asked and all the answers and all the snippets of example code. And then basically what you do is like copy and paste that code, uh, and then you're trying to make it work. And
Oh, okay. Mhm.
so like in all stages, there were some like resources that people would use, right? Like Stack Overflow was one example. Before that, it'd be like books and like tutorial websites and things like that. Uh So it's not like, help tools, AI is like the first help tool, although it's been, way more proactive about it. Cause like even with Stack Overflow, like you'd have to Google the problem, search the problem, like figure out like a question to ask. So I guess there was a little bit more like thought involved, right? Than just,
Mhm.
dumping the whole, you know, output from terminal straight into. uh, like an LLM. And these days, a lot of times I just, you know, prompt things and I also get it to work. But I'm not sure if you've used the plan mode on Cursor or on Cloud
Oh,
Code.
I did. I used the plan mode that makes a plan MD file on Cursor.
Yes.
Yes.
And I use the plan mode a lot. Like I make sure that the plan looks good. I have a lot of input in the plan. Like I go back and forth on the plan for, like tens of minutes,
Oh.
up to an hour to make sure that every bit of plan of the planned output looks good. And that is where I spend a lot of my time.
Mhm.
And once the plan looks good, I'll let the agent write the code.
Wow. Alright, that was so helpful for me. Um, I heard from a podcast, I don't remember that well, but it mentioned that AI is taking over 2 things. The first one is jobs, basically, and the second one is the gaps of knowledge, the knowledge gaps. So, it's like the beginner developers these days, they're not learning and experiencing enough. Those kind of, what is it? Strangling for hours and searching over books and what you mentioned, like Google or stuff. But they're just searching with simple prompts like, what's the problem with my code? And I have this error. What should I change? And these are just so easy. And these are creating these knowledge gaps. So the simple problems that you mentioned, we don't know these problems because we haven't experienced it before. We're like,
Mm.
a problem has just appeared. It's just like a red line, and I don't know what the problem is, so I just paste it an agent, and an agent just gives me the answer. And this is so easy. So we don't learn stuff, is what the podcast is actually saying.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is basically my biggest question these days. How should I learn as a beginner developer? What and how should I learn?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, well, the thing is, you with these agents, you also have, the world's most patient teacher with you, right?
Uh-huh.
The question is more to the individual learner. Like, how do you want to use, tools like ChatGPT and Claude? In that, do you want to use it as your, oh, do my homework or do my work, and just tell me the solution, type of interaction, or do you actually want to learn things by having it ask you questions or having it quiz you on things, like having it make sure that you understand its output. So I think it's more of the determination of the will and the will of the user. So if the user is constantly taking, like, shortcuts to just get the answer and ensure they're never going to learn anything, or like the speed of learning is gonna like decrease significantly because like just looking at the solutions is never gonna, you know, wire up the brain to think. Versus if you actually use ChatGPT as a tutor slash teacher and try to learn things with it, I think there could be an immense benefit because you have a one-on-one learning session, basically 24 hours at a really low cost. So I think it's more of, you know, and combined with resources that are available already, like whether it's like on YouTube or on websites or on books, like, you know, there's honestly like no excuse like not being able to like study because, you know, even if you're in the middle of nowhere now, you have a very good, the most patient teacher in the world, like right on your fingertips. So yeah.
Oh, is there like a good question that you can ask when learning stuff? Like, for example, rather than saying, I have an error, how should I fix it? You can ask, what kind of questions is the smart way?
I think you can prompt the agent to first, be the teacher, and then you'll be the student, and to not tell you the
Mm,
solution, right?
yeah. Oh, you okay?
And then you can, maybe, and then you can maybe, your first time you have no clue, and you copy and paste the whole error trace, and then it's not gonna tell you the answer right away. And then you can be like, "Help me understand through this error trace," right? Because like,
Mm.
that's step 1. And then it'll be like, "Hey, so this is what it means. This part is what this means. This is the core issue. These lines indicate, where the problem has started and where it's ended, blah, blah, blah." And as you repeat this process, the first few times it's gonna be pretty, annoying slash, you know, uh, high barrier because you're not gonna be able to figure out what it means, and you might just wanna skip to the answer. That
That's exactly what it.
Yeah, but if you repeat this a few times, you're gonna be able to gain the skills where where you start, you know, uh, you can start figuring out what the error is just by looking through the trace. And even if you don't know exactly what the error is, at least you'll know where to find it. And instead of copy and pasting the whole trace, now you can just ask about the error,
Mhm.
uh, so on and so forth. And, you know, there's always tools like Google that you can go back to, right? Without asking ChatGPT or Claude. And then, trying to manually search through answers. But like, I'm not sure if that's very helpful now that, tools like, chat is around, and even Google, it does have Gemini built in. So it's not like, you're not using AI. But, there are always ways to study, uh, you know, without having to go straight
Mhm.
to the solution.
That's right. But now it's really important for the students to have the urge to search by itself and have the urge to want to know stuff because yes, for me it's like I don't have to learn all these languages to have a project that I want to make. So
Mm.
I don't have to go through all of these learning processes, but to be a great developer and to be even a beginner developer, you need to have the urge to ask these questions and go through these tasks. These are
Yeah.
important things. All right. Now, then, let's talk about hiring. I am a junior in this university, and so this is actually a big problem for me too. I also assume that most of my listeners are also interested in whether AI will take away their job or not.
Mhm,
I also heard in Meta, they do
mhm.
these things called AI interviews for developers. Okay, then what efforts do you think we should make to get hired? This is kind of a broad question, but do you have some tips or stuff that you want to tell us about hiring?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think pretty much like junior engineers are actually irrelevant these days because uh, you know, tools like Claude Code or Cursor or Codex, they are basically junior engineers who never go to sleep, who never complain, things like that, right? As long as you continue, feeding them, money, all
Yep.
output open all night, all day, all night. So uh the junior engineers have really no, you know, you know, I guess, there's nothing for them to up, Claude Code in terms of the raw effort because you just can't. Now, what one has to become is a code reviewer, because it's not about how much code you can write, like no longer, because you can write so much code in 10 minutes these days. But it's about whether you know that the code that the AI generated is valid or invalid. So you need to be very good at reviewing the outputs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes
What
sense.
matters is figuring out what's wrong, what's right quickly, and deciding whether you're going to pivot your agent and, or, inject like your thought, be like, hey, this is actually not right. You should do it this way.
Oh, now I'm kind of having this thought that we need to buy those thick books and read it from page to page, not just start learning with agents. Because we need to know the structures and, well, basically everything.
I mean, that's one way, but think, you can still learn with agents as long as you are in that learning student mode. But if you're not in the learning mode, if you're more in like give me the solution right away mode, then you're not going to learn much from it.
So now I'm curious about how many AI agents you're using right now.
Hmm.
Actually, one of my Code Club members said that they feel like they need to use all sorts of AI because, if you don't use it, you're being left out. Or better yet, you're like falling behind because everybody is using it. So basically, how many AI agents are you using?
Mm, that's a good question. So right now I've been using Claude Code for the past almost year-ish and ChatGPT Codex. So those are my two main coding agents that I use. So Claude Code and ChatGPT Codex. And I used to use Cursor for some time, but I've moved off of Cursor these days.
Oh, can I ask, when did you move on to a cursor from, well, let me guess. Is it Claude Code you moved on to?
Yeah, so I moved off
Wasn't
Claude
Claude Code.
Code. Yeah.
When did you move on? Because from I remember like 6 months ago, Cursor was the mainstream, and then.
Yeah, that's a good point. I started using Claude Code back in like I think August of last year-ish.
Mm.
And I used it with Cursor for a little time. I moved off of using Cursor Agent, I think, late last year. And I moved off of Cursor completely, like earlier this year. And the reason is because, Cursor was cool like 2 years ago because coding agents weren't this good at writing code. And what Cursor had was auto completing. So when you were writing code yourself, it would come up with like auto completion hints. So it'd be like, hey, do you want to finish your code with this? And that was what made Cursor so popular. But these days, now that the agent fully writes the code, I don't need, things like Cursor because I just need to look at the code and review the code. So I'm not writing any code out, right? I'm just like letting the agent do the job and I'm just looking at the results.
Oh,
And then I go back to the agent being like, hey, this is good or hey, this is bad. So that's why I don't need an AI editor like Cursor anymore because I just need to look at the code.
now for the closing question. Do you have any last things to say to us, our listeners?
Yeah, I guess the main thing is don't get too discouraged, right? There's always a role for a human to play, at least for now. And I think currently the skill that we need is someone who can critically review the code that AI agents generate and, critically reject it. The actual critical thinking and the actual understanding and the designing of software is what we need people to do.
All right, that's kind of comforting and also alarming for me. Thank you for everything today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening. If this episode made you think differently about AI, coding, or creativity, feel free to share it with someone who's also trying to figure things out in this unusual but could be more fun AI era. See you next time!